After a night of drinks and games, a man by the name of Oscar left his friend's home in Kampala, Uganda. It was 3 a.m. and the moon that was halfway through the sky provided the only form of light in the area. In order to make it home, Oscar had to catch a boda, which is a name for a motorcycle rider in Uganda. To get one, he had to walk a considerable distance to the main road, which meant that he was oftentimes walking in the dark. But no matter, Oscar had made that walk several times. He could hear dogs in the distance, but they never troubled him. He sometimes walked past people, but they were just as eager to get home as he was, until that night. While making his way up the hill to the main road, Oscar would have to pass by a large tree whose branches formed a canopy over the road. And as he passed underneath it, Oscar felt the hairs on his body stand. The temperature in the area increased and he suddenly felt hot. He began to panic and increase his walking speed. After about 50 meters, he decided to turn back and scan the area in an effort to locate the threat. And up in the tree, what he saw was a man staring back at him, dressed in white. Chapter 1. Prankster Spirits. Compulsion. An irresistible urge to behave in a certain way, especially against one's own wishes. Imagine your neighbor. Let's call him John. John is a teacher, and about as regular as they come. He loves his students. He is patient with them when they don't understand. He finds ways to simplify complex topics, and all in all, he's a really good listener. The students trust him, and as a result, he becomes a go-to member in the village. But John has a terrible secret, and as the sky darkens and day turns to night, the tension builds. Hour after hour, like a coiled spring wound tighter with every moment of darkness, he feels it grow. Until after 10 p.m. when everyone is asleep, John becomes overwhelmed by these feelings, and he experiences a transformation. John begins to frantically take off his clothes and runs into the street. He becomes a man on the prowl under moonlight in search of an appropriate target to harass. An upstanding member of the community by day, John is now running about like a man possessed. A man possessed by a spirit. He was now a night dancer, or as Kenyans would call him, a night runner. The word used to refer to them in the Ugandan local languages is musezi for singular or abasezi for plural. This is the word used among the Bantu peoples of Uganda, which include the Baganda, Basoga, and the Banyoro, etc. They also believe that the spirit that possesses people like John is called Ichitambo, meaning an evil spirit, at least amongst the Banyoro, Basoga, and the Baganda. That is the word they use. There are slight variations of the names about night dances as you'll see throughout the series. For example, other Bantu groups like the Bukusu of Kenya call them Omubidi, and the Kaguru of Tanzania call them Wakindi. But the Luo peoples of Uganda and Kenya, such as the Acholis, Alur, Japadola, and Dolo of Western Kenya, just to name a few, also speak of the night dancers as being possessed. The word they use is jok, meaning spirit. And it rises in the suspect's head and then transforms them into a night dancer. Which is interesting because Bantu people also describe the spirit as one that climbs. So, for example, the Basoga will say, Ejitambu chamuninye, meaning the spirit climbed him. In other cases, according to Okot Bitek, the jok or spirit expands in them. In his book, The Religion of the Central Luo, Okot relays a story about a woman who was asleep with her lover when she awoke to find that he had expanded into several times his size. Her boyfriend eventually returned to his normal size, but instead of going back to sleep, he stripped naked and ran outside to night dance. From this, we can gather that there is some sort of build-up to the transformation, like emotions or something. The spirit probably wells up until the subject gives in, and at that point, they transform. Hence why some would call it a compulsion, an irresistible urge to behave in a certain way. Now, both Bantu and Luo people describe the entity as evil, of course because it drives people to disturb their neighbors in a variety of ways. But the night dancer comes in many forms. And as far as I can tell, there are about 3 versions. There's the one that scares and disturbs people at night. Being a nuisance. There's another that casts spells and brings misfortune to people. And then there's another that eats people. That being said, there is significant overlap between them, especially when people are talking about them, so these may not be necessarily thought of as distinct categories by those who suffer at their hands. Let's talk about the first kind, the ones who like to give people a good fright at night. What interests me about them is the apparent level of mischief that characterizes their actions. Here's what I mean. Tom Kwanya, one of the few people on the planet doing academic research on this strange phenomena, seriously, you are doing great work, sir, compiles a detailed list of what these night folks get up to. For instance, one of the things they do is run very fast and noisily. Given the context that they're doing this at night, seeing someone run up to you full speed will no doubt be terrifying. Remember that scene from the movie Get Out, the one where the guy was running at Daniel Kaluuya's character when he went out to smoke? Literally that. Now, strip him naked. No diddy. That is a night dancer. You'll see everything. Dingleberries, pawpaws, peaches, whatever it is you call them. That's what makes them mischievous. Seeing this, you wouldn't know whether to be scared or confused. Another thing they do is shake people's houses, kick their doors in, rattle their windows, and when people come out to find the culprit, they hide, creating this stupid cat and mouse game when all you want to do is sleep. A variation of this in the Western world would be kids that ring the doorbell and run away. Usually this happens during the day, sometimes at night, but imagine it happening late at night. It can create a truly terrifying experience. A third thing they do is farting near people's windows and defecating in front of their doors. Imagine stepping on that in the morning as you come out your door. I couldn't think of a better way to ruin my morning. There's many others, but let's do one more, and then we'll move on. This is my personal favorite: waylaying and scaring late night travelers. What is waylaying, you ask? Oh, that's when people hide in the bushes and leap out at you as you walk by. Boo, aka jump scares. It's said that they usually wait for their victims at junctions or intersections from which they can jump out and scare them. Usually the victims are random, but in some cases, night dancers would have learned the routine of a particular individual so they can time their scares. Do you see what I mean? Like, someone is trying to be funny, but of course the joke isn't. And then there's the whole use of poop thing. It's very 5th grader like, humor-wise. Then they have this thing with their bums. Residents recount that night dancers like to bang doors with their buttocks and rub them against the doorknobs. In some cases, when you find them, they show you their butts, aka they moon you. It's bizarre. Where your standard supernatural night creatures would prowl the night to eat and rip apart their targets, night runners, particularly of the prankster variety, are not interested in doing that. They just want to scare their targets while having a grand old time doing it.
Perfect.
Yes, excellent.
And they have accomplished that. Kenyans speak of night runners with so much fear that even showing one a video of a night runner at work using hidden cameras with the hopes of dispelling the mystery made her even more scared.
Sijui hao watu wanafanya nini? Ona. Hao watu hata wanaweza kuua mtu. Ona, anakimbia, anacheza, anapika nyumba.
After watching their actions, this mother became even more afraid of them.
For those listening, she's saying that they're going to kill her. Of course, we in the West may have a similar reaction if someone was to show us a video of strangely dressed people causing chaos outside our house. coming back night after night to ensure that we do not get a wink of sleep. And to quote one of the night runners interviewed in that video, that brings them joy. You guys need to seriously watch that Afrimax documentary video after this. It's quite something. To hear the night runner describe his activities was like listening to a child bask in the thrill of getting away with a secret, like unrepentant and reveling in the chaos left behind. This guy described how he escapes from the scene of the crime. Once the target wakes up to go outside to investigate the source of the noise, the night runner plants his raised feet against the house and shoots out like a sprinter at the Olympics. He then does a somersault to face the terrorized individual as if to get one last look at their petrified face before disappearing into the darkness. Those poor people can be so frightened that some lose the ability to speak for days. So I started to wonder, what sort of spirit would possess someone to do this? Like, what is it? What would make you do this? Why? Why? The identity of the spirit or spirits that possesses night dancers or runners is never spoken of. It's simply known as spirit or demonic spirit, evil. That's one of the ways residents tormented by them could explain such unreasonable behavior. But what keeps getting my attention is the nature of these acts, designed to annoy, irritate, anger, and terrify their victims all at once. And so I thought, could the night dancer / runner spirits that possess them be of the trickster variety? Like Loki, god of mischief in Norse mythology, Anansi, trickster god of the Akan people of Ghana, or even Hermes of Greek mythology, who stole Apollo's cows when he was apparently a day old. Go figure. Which is another thing night runners do. They release people's cows out of their enclosures so that the owners will wake up confused and scared, believing that someone was trying to steal their cows. In another incident, researcher Tom Kleiner recounts a story told to him by his informants that a night dancer would come into his compound and pull his cow from the cowshed to ride it until it got tired. He would then come in the morning to milk his cow, only to discover that the poor thing had collapsed from the exhaustion. It was actually apparently foaming at the mouth. Night runners are determined to find all angles to be a menace to society while people sleep. They are also similar to another Greek trickster god of fire, called Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and tricked Zeus into picking the wrong sacrifice. Like him, night runners and dancers are also associated with fire. Yeah, some say that they levitate with fire in their palms. Others say that they swallow it and spit it right out. In Uganda, they say that night dancers can ignite their palms by slapping them together, kind of like how Liu Kang from Mortal Kombat does. Or pick your other many of the fire users in fantasy. Whatever. Perhaps that's how they roast the human flesh they're going to eat. No need for a spit, ladies and gentlemen. You can roast on the go. Others speak of them as being capable of farting out the fire from their bums, like a rocket, ready for takeoff. And that's probably how they levitate. Now, I thought this was funny until I read Kiyoshi Umeo's book on the Jabudos of Eastern Uganda, and he said, get this, okay? Night dancers emit light from their anuses like a headlamp. It said that they run so fast that people mistake them for a car. Now, give me a second. If this is true, that the light is coming from the anus, and people think it's a car, does that mean that they're running backwards with their bums out?
What's that?
Girl, that's a booty hole.
Not a hole, Keisha. A valve.
I don't even know what to say about this. Here again, you see the humorous element in connection to them. Like, the theatrics are off the walls with these guys, from fire coming out of their asses to running and dancing upside down, which is something they actually do, apparently. And when residents see that at night, they conclude, naked demon, evil spirit, evil witch. Of course, because do you know who else operates at night? Witches. Chapter 2. Witches and Sorcerers. Sometime in the early 14th century, in the western part of Uganda, a power struggle between two local religious groups was brewing. The first group was called the Basoga, and it was made up of mediums and priests who led worship that involved nature spirits called Misamba. These Misamba were believed to be tied to the location of the specific animal, hill, or water body that they would inhabit. According to historian Indoledi Nsamba, the Basoga priests had established various power centers throughout the southern part of the country, and from these centers, they provided healing and controlled important economic industries, like metalworking, fishing, and agriculture. As a result, people flocked to them. From the shores of Lake Victoria in the east to the shores of Lake Albert in the west, their names are spoken of. In the Kingdom of Bunyoro in the western part of the country, they formed what is known today as the first dynasty of Bunyoro, the Batembuzi. But as the years rolled by and the new century came into view, another group had been slowly making inroads in the country, and they were called the Batrezi. What made them different was their ability to travel with the spirits. While the Basoga priests were tied to particular locations that housed the spirit they would worship, the Batrezi were not. And so began the power struggle. One by one, the Batrezi began taking control from the established Basoga priests. With such direct challenges, it was only a matter of time before violence broke out. The Batrezi, known for wearing their horned crowns, would ram their victims clean through and throw them off cliffs. In response to the crushing violence, Nsamba tells us that the Basoga priests resorted to night dancing. And they did this as a form of protest. So, when night would fall and everyone would go to sleep, they would go to the Batrezi priests' compounds, naked, covered in ash, and ready to dance. What exactly was that supposed to do? Good question. I suppose it was a way to strike fear into the hearts of the Batrezi, much like the night dances of today aim to do. And it worked. However, not necessarily to their advantage, for in doing so, the Batrezi priests called them sorcerers, a crime they punished by drowning, similar to the witches of Europe. And that, according to Nsamba, is why night dancing was practiced. Now, Nsamba is the only historian I've come across who offers a historical explanation for why night dancing was practiced. If what he says is true, that it was a form of protest, then this night dancing method probably served as a fear-based tactic to force the Batrezi to give up. But they probably didn't expect the level of retaliation that would come from it. The Batrezi instead viewed the Basoga priests as users of evil magic, a view that modern-day residents of communities haunted by night dancers also have. This perception of them as witches or sorcerers is most likely a result of not only the fear they've induced, but also the fact that they practice at night. Most bad things happen at night for obvious reasons. It's dark, you can't see, you get the idea. And for witches, this is of course when they too come alive. Whenever you think of witchcraft ceremony, it's most likely not happening during the day now, is it? Nighttime is so fitting for occultish behavior that even the English call the time after midnight the witching hour. Definitions may vary. But it is said that during that time, all kinds of supernatural beings come out and are at their most powerful. Humans beware. A world asleep is a stage where their hidden realm awakens, where spirits stir and shadows stretch in the moonlight, where werewolves howl at the moon and night dancers dance. Is it a coincidence that night dancers tend to operate between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m., which happens to also be around the same time as the witching hour? I'll let you decide. The point is, the night is long and full of terrors. And those like night dancers who feel most at home lurking in the darkness are probably best avoided. The danger aspect is what I want you to focus on here. While night dancers may be called harmless by some like Tom Kwanya, it is clear that they are viewed as threats. I agree with Norman Miller's description that they are psychological terrorists. And I think that when Kwanya labels them as harmless, he's referring to the fact that they don't cause physical harm, unlike actual witches. But inflicting mental anguish is not harmless, and it's a terrified mind that gives birth to all kinds of legends and myths about night dancers. Among the Bantu and Luo peoples who speak of these night folk, there are a lot of differences when it comes to who is a witch and who isn't. Is a night dancer or runner a witch, or something else entirely. For example, Tom Kwanya, who did his research among the Luo of Kenya, will say that they are not witches. But he does say that some people think of them as such, and that it is witches who masquerade as night dancers that kill people. Hence why people think they will be killed by them. I spoke to someone from Bunyoro in western Uganda who told me that they are different. In her words, witches are barogo, from the Bunyoro word okuroga, which means to bewitch. And John Beatty, who did a lot of research in Bunyoro, mentions that the term burogo, which comes from okuroga, can mean sorcery. So at that point, I realized that I was confused. Are sorcery and witchcraft the same thing? Is the sorcerer the same as the witch? The words are oftentimes used interchangeably, but a quick Google search will tell you that they are indeed not the same. But definitions vary across the board, so let's just pick one and move on. Witchcraft, according to one source, refers to supernatural power derived from spirits. It could be for good, or it could be for evil. Sorcery, on the other hand, refers to supernatural power used with the intention to harm, and doesn't come from spirits. For instance, a common act of sorcery talked about among the Luo and Bantu is when one goes into someone else's compound and buries a disemboweled frog with plucked out eyes. The sorcerer would whisper some incantations as they bury the dead amphibian in the ground. The intention being that the target's eyes and stomach would burst like that of the frog. That is sorcery. Night dancers would fall into the witchcraft category, since they are possessed by a spirit, which would make sense as to why the Basoga and Baganda of the Bantu ethnic group define them as a type of witch. In fact, A.P. Isiko in his paper, An Expository Study of Witchcraft Among the Basoga of Uganda, says that the witch is the night dancer. And the Balogo, sorcerers, are not driven by any mystical powers, but instead use potions and poisons. Similar to the frog, right? There's no actual mysticism going on apart from incantations and then burying it in the ground. Now, with the Luo of Western Kenya, the term Jajuoko Tieno is used to refer to the night dancer, which means night witch. Based on the work of Tom Kwanya, night dancers/runners agree that they are spirit-possessed and have an array of abilities. They disagree, however, with the definition of witch since they believe that they don't cause harm. But the problem here is that these two groups are too similar for people to tell them apart. Both operate at night when no one can see them, talk in strange voices, dress freakishly to appear terrifying, and have some association with the spirit world. That stuff frightens people, which again is their goal. Residents are so scared that they associate them with ferocious animals like leopards, snakes, crocodiles, and hippos. But that they're even more terrifying than these creatures in that they have powers capable of taming them. And if you were to encounter a night dancer/runner at night, chances are you might find them riding on these wild animals like one would a horse. I don't need to tell you what would happen if you met one. This is interesting because here again we have another similarity between witches and night dancers. In African and worldwide cultures, witches, or those who commune with the supernatural, are oftentimes connected to animals which are referred to as familiars. Prime examples, as I mentioned earlier, are the Basoga priests. Right? They were believed to control creatures, especially snakes and leopards, and such acts made them extraordinary by serving as a demonstration of their power. Now, other people believe that night dancers bring misfortune and death. Death which could be cast upon you with a single glance. In other words, they possessed yir, as the Luo say, and in English, it means the evil eye. The evil eye is a concept found worldwide that means that a bad look could bring misfortune. And can you guess which types of people were blamed and accused of using it? That's right, witches. Another example, John Beatty, the ethnographer who did a lot of work in Bunyoro, commented that his assistant Mr. Mpuru recorded that a night dancer had rang a bell by his tent at 2 a.m. When he came to look, the night dancer took off. 3 days later, he died of pneumonia. Beatty wrote that he recorded this without comment, leaving room for one to wonder if there was some truth to this whole bringer of death thing. we leave it up to you. So you can see why some residents would come to believe that night dancers and runners are also capable of casting spells like witches and sorcerers do, even if they claim to not be hurting anyone and are therefore not witches. To the residents who are terrified of them, who are tormented by them, those clarifications would fall on deaf ears. And it's not as if people don't know that their aim is to scare. They do. In fact, one person told me that if you show them that you're not afraid, they'll leave you alone. Which makes sense because what they want the most is your reaction, like any typical bully. Night dancers technically are bullies. Even Okotbitek in his book, The Religion of the Central Luo, makes a distinction between a dangerous night dancer and a non-dangerous one, and that the punishments between those two were different. But alas, most people are not psychologically prepared to have to deal with these prankster witches. People speak of them as being able to freeze their victims in place. In some cases, those who went after them would have their legs rendered useless so that they would walk like they have a disability. Others believe that they would cause a failure of a victim's business and can also reach into your dreams. Chapter 3. Night Dances and Nightmares. Beware the Eaters of Fear. Suffolk, England, 1599. In a place called Bury St. Edmunds in Suffolk, a trial was being held for a woman called Olive Barthram. Barthram was being accused of witchcraft, and among the many accusations levied at her was one by her neighbor, Joanne Jordan. You see, Jordan believed that Barthram had sent a creature to torment her at night. This creature, she said, was a black substance or spirit that slid down the chimney and would lie on top of her as she slept. It would put so much pressure on her that she couldn't move. It would also slap her as if trying to wake her up, and also stop her from being able to cry for help. On another occasion, this thing took a different form and this time showed up as a cat. For whatever reason, Joanne Jordan believed that Olive Barthram had sent those creatures. She thought that Barthram was a witch trying to kill her. Barthram was found guilty and hung at Bury St. Edmunds. In previous European societies, they used to believe that a certain creature would visit them as they slept. Those who received this unwanted visitor would complain that it sat on their chests or rode them like a horse, rendering them unable to move. During this time, they would be asleep but not asleep, able to hear but couldn't move an inch. Victims of this creature would experience choking, pressure on their chest, and a loss of speech. This creature was called a nightmare. And that is where we get the word nightmare to refer to bad dreams. So, Olive Bartham's alleged black substance creature was a continuation of the nightmare folklore. If you haven't put it together already, what they were describing is what we'd call today in modern day society sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis is defined by the loss of motor functions, usually right after falling asleep or right before you wake up. According to the Sleep Foundation, about 75% usually include hallucinations. Now, imagine my surprise when I was listening to a story about night dancers when I noticed how similar they sounded to sleep paralysis. The person I was speaking to talked about how her grandmother had been tormented night after night for years by a particular night dancer in the village. According to her, this night dancer would sit on her chest, stopping her from being able to move, but would also choke her in the process. So I asked, would he sneak into the room and physically attack her? No, she exclaimed. He apparently would, as I understood it, stand outside her door and send his spirit inside the house to terrorize her as she slept. Basically, he astral projected himself. Like the story of Olive Barthram and Joanne Jordan, this night dancer's spirit was the reason her grandmother had so much trouble sleeping, which sounded to me like sleep paralysis. And as I spoke to people and read more about night dancers/runners, I began to realize that there was a connection between them and sleep disorders, particularly parasomnias. Parasomnias are defined as a type of sleep disorder that causes one to make abnormal movements, to talk, express emotions, and do unusual things while asleep. Someone watching you might even think that you're awake, but you're not. Sleep paralysis is considered a parasomnia. And much like the European societies in the past, a witch was often cited as the cause of that disorder. The grandma of the person I spoke to suffered nightly attacks from various well-known night dancers in the village, all of whom would come into her home and choke her. According to her, they knew she was under attack when they would hear her struggling for air. Basically, the sound she made was That's not funny. I'm sorry. And they all employed different methods to strangle her. One night dancer would use his hands, another allegedly used his legs, and another, being a woman, the grandmother knew quite well, would use her enormous buttocks to knock the wind out of her by sitting on her chest. I couldn't help but laugh at that. Did I mention that one of the major characteristics of sleep paralysis are hallucinations? It's highly probable that what grandma was experiencing was the result of a hallucination brought on by her disorder. And these hallucinations took the form of the cultural context that she existed in. So, if grandma is suspicious of so-and-so and believes them to be night dancers, chances are they'll be what she sees when she hallucinates. In fact, hallucinations experienced during sleep paralysis are categorized into 3 types. 1. Intruder hallucinations, which means the subject sees an intruder or an evil presence in their bedroom. So for grandma, that's the night dancer. For Joanne Jordan, that was Olive Bartham's evil spirit. 2nd, chest pressure, which is often accompanied by choking sensations. The 3rd, vestibular motor hallucinations, which can include out-of-body experiences. 2 of these were experienced by grandma, making this most likely a case of sleep paralysis rather than a supernatural one. But sleep paralysis is not the only parasomnia that is connected to night dancing. Remember that story I told you in the first chapter about the woman who woke up to find that her lover had ballooned to twice the size from the spirit inside of him? Well, what is also mentioned is that those possessed by this spirit aren't often aware of what they do. When the spirit suddenly attacks and takes over, subjects would find themselves doing strange things, unusual things, as was the case with the boyfriend, who then, after returning to normal size, proceeded to strip naked and run outside. Thinking about this situation in connection to parasomnias, what does that sound like to you? Ever heard of sleepwalking? Somnambulism, aka sleepwalking, is a type of parasomnia that can make one get up with their eyes open, walk about, perform complex tasks without actually being awake. Sleepwalkers can speak, drive, and even play a musical instrument. If they can do that, then it's safe to say that removing one's clothes and dancing is not so far out of the realm of possibility. But to a society that doesn't know about this condition, this could look indistinguishable from a spirit possession. I mean, what are you to make of someone who you know walking about at night, mumbling to themselves, unable to answer you properly, but they take off their clothes and go and dance under the moonlight? That's just horrifying to watch. Sleepwalking victims never remember what they did, and similarity said that those taken over by the Echtambo, Jok, or spirit are unaware of their own actions. I was told that other times it can be a spell placed on you by a night dancer that causes victims to do these weird things. Particularly, a night dancer can cast a spell that causes people to wake up unknowingly and go dig in the gardens of that night dancer. In other words, a night dancer has the ability to manipulate you to do his or her bidding. The only giveaway would be your feet. If your feet were dirty, then you know that a night dancer had put you out in the field. This ability to manipulate is also mentioned by Okot Bitek when he wrote about the central law of Uganda. He wrote that night dancers can stump their feet heavily while going round and round your house. In the process of doing that, they cause those inside to experience feelings of grogginess and are unable to think or move or do anything. By not being able to move, I'm assuming those inside were probably experiencing sleep paralysis. This connection to sleep disorders makes sense. Night dancers, or those who commit these acts knowingly, fit the intruder aspect that is so common in sleep paralysis stories. Since they like to scare people at night, especially those who are already asleep, it makes sense that they would eventually show up as their nightmares. Fear is a prominent element of sleep disorders. If you've ever experienced a parasomnia, the anxiety of anticipation is overwhelming. Some can worry about falling asleep because doing so means possibly experiencing a nightmare, sleep paralysis, or sleepwalking. In the process of this worry, the nightmare began even before they fell asleep, sat, perched upon their shoulders, shaking their head like a bear shakes a tree. The nuts that fall out, they're thoughts. I hope I don't get a nightmare tonight. What if I don't? What if I do something embarrassing when I sleepwalk? For those who didn't know the science behind parasomnias, their thoughts were filtered through the lens of the supernatural. The spirit will come again tonight. The night dancer will make me go into the field again. So, night dancers / runners whose prime goal is to frighten people at night while they sleep, make the symptoms of those who suffer from these afflictions even worse. Like the nightmare creatures of Europe that would cause terrifying dreams and feed on fear, so too do the night dancers of East Africa seek ways to induce it in their victims, becoming more and more relentless the more afraid their target is. Because remember, that brings them joy. And thus, sleep disorders, actions, and the legends of night dancers are combined to form a very powerful nightmare, one whose desire is not only to disrupt your slumber, but also feed on your fear. Thank you for listening. If you liked the video or podcast, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Sorcerers used are on the screen or description box below if you want to read more. There is a part 2 to this, so that should be coming in a few weeks. Anyways, stay tuned. My name is David Ibanda, and this is a podcast / YouTube channel, Those Who Came Before Us.